Anyway, I think we can get things started. So welcome everyone to today's QSA Roundtable. We're focused specifically today on those changes in the SA Self-Attestation Questionnaire version A, as well as changes in PCI DSS 4.0.1, and very specifically 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. My name is Matt McGurk. I am head of field engineering here at Source Defense. I'm fortunate enough to host these things every so often, but more importantly, we have a few experts from across the industry who are joining us today. I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves, and maybe I'll just start here. Lee, would you mind giving us a couple words about yourself?
Sure. Hey everyone, Lee Quinton. I'm the Compliance Practice Manager for Trusted Sec. My payment security career began around 2005. Got a QDSP working for Visa and MasterCard directly, and then was in one of the first QSA classes, PA QSA, PFI, ASV, you name it. I've been around the block over the years.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Ty, how about yourself?
Hello, my name is Ty Hewley. I'm technical manager at Optiv. I've been doing PCI since probably the beginning, more around 2007. Little, not as long as Lee there.
Good. Robert, how about yourself?
Sure. I'm Robert Davidson. I'm the national practice lead for AT&T and Level Blue. Maybe the youngest one in this group because I started around 2016, actually 2014, with PCI.
Excellent. And then Art, last but not least, of course.
Everybody knows me as Coop, and I am the C in PCI. So, no, I've been around a little bit myself. I started out as a QDSP like Lee. I was actually in the first QSA class. I believe Kathy Levy referred to it as, yeah, it was a snowstorm class. I believe that was what she called it. And then I was in the first PA QSA classes that Hap Hune did in Boston there. I think he actually did San Francisco first, then he came to Boston. And then I worked for the council from about 2010 to 2013. And I was the trainer. I used to teach all the ISAs, QSAs, what have you. So I enjoy it. And I've been in it since day one and plan to stick around as long as they'll have me.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate you guys joining today. We'll get into it here in just 1 second. I wanted to point out for the audience in terms of format, this is going to be a pretty free-form conversation. I'm going to guide things just a little bit, but you are more than welcome to ask any questions you might want. I'll keep an eye on the Q&A bubble here in Zoom, so feel free to do that way. And we'll get started here. So I think what is probably on the mind of a lot of people here, gentlemen, is the self-attestation questionnaire, and specifically a couple of eligibility requirements that changed here, like I'd say about 3 weeks ago, just a little bit before the deadline. I'll give you my brief understanding of what has changed. That there is basically now a kind of a switch statement in there, to be technical about it, that either a merchant who wants to remain eligible for the SAQ-A has to have mechanisms in place similar to 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 to make sure that their site is not susceptible to eSkimming attacks, or to that they need to work with their payment service provider if they're implementing an iframe to make sure that that iframe is not susceptible to attack. So always really intimidating doing that kind of summary in front of a bunch of experts. But what do you guys think about my attempt there? Would you say that's accurate, or how would you interpret these new changes?
It's an accurate response. I mean, ultimately, the council themselves have said that easiest, best way to meet that eligibility criteria is to enact 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. So, as I said earlier, hail the new king, same as the old king. So just people do it, and it will make life easier. It's not to say there aren't other ways of achieving that eligibility, but just complying with what were the original controls will by far and away meet the intent.
Yeah, to Lee's point, you want to stay out of that gray area. And personally, I haven't seen anything without a tool intervention. You have to have some level of integrity monitoring going on in order to meet 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. So getting the tools that are built for it is the ideal. possibility. But I know people are out there and they want to customize their own thing or build their own thing. That's just going to bring your us QSAs into that gray area, and it's questionable at that point.
I think ultimately, Matt, the intent of the change is really to enact on small merchants, right? These are merchants that may not have the capabilities that some of the larger organizations could have to meet it. But that's why we rely on, tools like y'all's tool, which, super easy to integrate, super easy to implement, and that would cover these controls.
Yeah, I agree. I see we have a comment. Howard's on. Hey, Howard. Nice to see a comment from you. He basically said, well, the merchant's still liable for their webpage. Always has been that way. As you know, Howard, we've had many conversations about SAQ-A with merchants and everybody else. And, everybody wanted to hold on to that precious SAQ-A with their iframes and their redirects. And the problem is we just had so much eSkimming going on. Something had to happen. So I personally was quite pleased when they added these two requirements to the SAQ-A, but this thing, Lee, you said it best, the same or different king or however you put it. It's the same thing. And in order to be eligible, if you really want to show it to somebody, you're going to end up having to do what we were going to have you do anyway for those two requirements, and you may end up having to do a little more.
Well, so aren't here.
Oh, you lost me. Sorry.
For a second there.
Oh, okay. And so it's definitely caused a lot of confusion. And the sad thing is, some merchants are going to be forced to end up having to do a SAQ-A EP. And it's going to be even more stuff that they didn't understand before when they were just doing the SAQ-A. So
and of course with AEP, you're doing 643 and 1161 anyway.
Correct.
That's right.
Yep.
It's an implementation, though, right?
Yeah.
Really
That's
focus
right.
on your implementation.
That's right.
That's of interest to me. So I have two kind of well, let's start with the first one. Sometimes I hear when I'm speaking to people who are trying to solve this is, have the requirements changed? And as my reading, the answer is no. It's about eligibility. Did I get that right?
Exactly. I mean, years ago, the council kind of said that if a control could apply, it applied. And then with the birth of SAQs, obviously to channel towards smaller merchant sizes, they reduced the compliance burden. So in effect, subsets of controls were delineated, and self-assessing or QSA assessing on their behalf attestations could be done based on a smaller compliance burden, based on certain technical approaches generally are what delineate each one.
Yeah, and I have seen customers out there that are so small that their e-commerce page does not change, and if they can do some kind of integrity to show that their pages are not changing, and they're trying to avoid getting an expensive tool. The good news is a source defense is not expensive compared to some of their competitors out there. And I've seen a lot of these, people that are selling tools out there, they're pricing it based on the size of your web page or your volume of transactions you're taking. So it usually is, priced right. But I do also believe that the reason 643 and 1161 came into play is it was just too easy to insert a redirect link on an unmature website, or a small merchant could easily just plug in a template and be hosted somewhere, and some vicious person can just insert their payment provider redirect link as a checkout thing. So I think the console doesn't want to get their name dirty, or they want to save their reputation as well as protect yours by now enforcing the parent web pages now to have some level of integrity monitoring on it.
think we also have to.
We had Magcart. No, I just wanted to say Magcart. I'll just say the word and then.
You're right there where I was headed. I was like, that's the history of the time, right? We have to look at when this was written. I mean,
That's right.
MageCart was everywhere. It was hitting the news. It was hitting media. It was hitting, individual sites. Hundreds, thousands of sites were impacted.
Well, and is it any wonder really if we just step back to the previous version of SAQ-A, virtually no protective controls, defensive controls were pretty much on their ass, and you own that web server that's controlling the entrance to the iframe or the redirect. Thank you very much, man in the middle all day long. Even past the correct traffic through at the end after you've siphoned it off. That it wasn't unfeasible, and there were no controls in the DSS asking to protect them, so it had to happen. It was just such a shock to see the rug pulled out from under everybody. 10 weeks before payday,
and no revision. They didn't even change the version.
No.
Just add a little R.
Yeah,
R1.
a little R. I was like,
to release it as a blog post and to put language in there now saying that the whole site had to be protected, not just the payment page. I'm surprised Amazon didn't absolutely crap.
Yeah.
You think how big
That's-
a done
That's something that's interesting to me as kind of a close reader of documents. There's two things that stood out to me in the SAQ-A revision and the knock-on documents. It was the word susceptible, that you are not susceptible to these attacks. And then the second thing was site, which I thought was interesting. So as a web developer, when I hear the word site, I don't think the part of my web application that serves a web page that's for payment. I think of everything in the site. So I don't want to be like kind of too much of a jerk about it, but it seems like the scope got really blown out by that word site, as well as susceptible is ambiguous to me, but I'm curious if I'm being overly.
No, you weren't. We all pulled that up. We all pulled
Yeah.
up on that one on the first day of release. It was a glaring distinction.
So typically in PCI world, we have PCI throws in definitions occasionally, because sometimes we all can't agree on what like site means. Is an example, right? Like, is site a payment page, or what does site mean? So that's just something that has to be defined. But I think spirit and intent is payment page, right? It's the location that hosts the iframe.
The intent.
Right.
Spirit and intent, at least.
Yeah.
Right. We have another good comment on here talking about steganography, and it's true. If there's a .png image file that's in the shopping cart, you could do some steganography and figure out a way to do some virtual skimming. Scarily true. So that's where the idea of the integrity comes in. So again, it's not just scripts. There are other little tricks and things that they can use to get in there, and I think as we go down the road, there's going to be even more tightening on some of this stuff, to the point where we're going to go back to the old days where the payment pages were what they were. You made a payment and you didn't have all these dancing people going, thank you for buying that underwear and wow, and all this stuff on payment pages. Something tells me we're going to see a lot of simplistic stuff happening, because while these solutions like Matt, you guys have, and other vendors have, that can stop the messing about with scripts and so forth, steganography is still a very valid way that they feed things in. The good news is that the ones that I've seen that have been able to do a skim, it's actually a script hidden in the image.
Right.
And so that's how it ends up getting tagged. But it's kind of scary that we went how many years with SAQ-A, like Lee said, with no real protections in there, and I used to tell merchants, if there's a breach, they're coming after you. That it's and I was able to convince some of them, the larger ones, to do more than just say, it's SAQ-A, we're good.
I mean, there wasn't even ASV, right? There's
That's right.
nothing.
There was no requirement for it.
Nothing.
There's
It
a
was
little bit
bad.
of hardening system defaults. That's about all you have.
Yeah.
That was it.
System
Change the
defaults,
password.
Yeah,
you
make
know,
sure there's no
like,
group,
make
group
sure it's
passwords and
patched.
accounts.
Make sure your web server's patched,
Patched.
so it's patched, but you didn't even have to vulnerability scan it. And now you have to vulnerability scan it. So that's good that they're doing that, at least an external vulnerability scan. And then let's step it up with the integrity monitoring too, and make sure that code's not getting altered or changed. So and I've always, even when I did assess people on their SAQ-A, I'm like, okay, I know these are the requirements, but if you have monitoring capability, you should be monitoring your page, because you don't want your page defaced, do you? You don't want that. I mean, if it can happen, it can happen, and the best surefire way is have a pen tester come out and make sure they can't deface your web page or change any of the code on it, you know. And that's what I used to tell people before source defense came onto the scene. And now it's just such a simple way of just like, hey, I can see all the activity that's happening behind the scenes, and I know what's foreign and what's not, and I can authorize and what are my good scripts versus bad scripts, and if I don't know what it is, I can go investigate it. So I'm super happy to see that this is starting to come about.
So we have a question. We talked about susceptibility. We talked about site a little bit and how that's blown out. There's a second part of, so a merchant who wants to remain SAQ-A eligible has to make sure of those things, and I won't read the whole thing to you, but basically that when a payment service provider's iframe, the embedded payment form, is implemented correctly, that solution includes techniques that protect the merchant's payment pages from such attacks. So I'm a little fuzzy on what that's supposed to mean. It sounds kind of like the TPSP is supposed to give you security technology along with their iframe.
Sounds like a sandbox thing is what I think they're talking about.
That to me is classically Shopify.
Yep.
That type of environment where they're managing the infrastructure as well as the payment channel.
Or that offering from Shopify, because Shopify will give you, but Lee's right, it's that Shopify sandbox that they have, where you go in and you basically put the name of your store and the prices or whatever it is, very limited stuff, and then everything is managed, controlled in their environment.
Yeah, I think this is where we have to really clear up definitions, right? Like in the Shopify example, you could be fully hosted in Shopify. You have no administrative controls.
That's right.
There's other situations that you could be pushing an iframe, which I know that there are looking into, how to, make merchants compliant with this that are providing iframes. But that stuff is just now starting. I haven't seen a lot of that come out to market yet. And redirects, right? That's the other big popular one. Redirects has a lot more coverage over something like this than like an iframe solution.
Now, I do think that payment providers could jump into the space and offer integrity monitoring on the scripts that they're sending out and so forth. But you have to really make sure that that is lock and key with your roles and responsibilities matrix, and that third party service provider says, yes, I am going to handle 6.43 and 11.6.1 for you, and I am going to put integrity monitoring on your parent page. And I haven't seen anybody do that yet, but I'm just saying that I can see coming down the pipe. And I think that might be where you're starting to see some of this like SAQ-A revert back to. I think it's more because of the Shopify, to be honest, type of scenario. But if there are payment providers and other solution providers out there that says, hey, I can guarantee you that when you host with us, nothing is going to change about your hosted environment, and we're handling that for you.
Right. So it sounds like it's pretty clear for the case of I'm a merchant, I'm using what I'll call as a platform as a service. I'm going there, I'm typing in what my products are, I'm typing in what they should cost and where the money should end up at the end of the transaction. But I'm not truly doing development.
Yeah, you don't have
content
the control.
only. It's not I'm at the code level. If you've got merchants that have code level administrative capabilities, I see this as super challenging. So it's those merchants that are saying, hey, I want to use that platform as a service, and the only thing I want to be able to do is push content such as my product line and price and get a report of how many things I sold at the end of the day. But it's not like, hey, I'm writing my code and I'm doing any of that level of stuff.
That makes perfect sense to me. It sounds like it's still pretty dicey, but that there's a pretty limited set of cases where SAQ-A eligibility is still guaranteed. And I mean, even though I'm coming from a vendor, those cases are valid. If you can't modify the code in the platform that you're using, it really shouldn't be your responsibility. You should be passing that off to a wholesale platform, so long as that's something your business is compatible with, so to speak. Let's see here. We got a lot of questions. Thank you, everyone, for pouring them in here. I've seen a couple things about redirects in here. What happens if the virtual skimmer vendors don't control this? So let's do this one real quick. In the case of a true redirect, where a visitor to the merchant site is sent to the to the payment service provider's web application and web pages, what's the responsibility there? Who has to do what under SAQ-A?
Well, it's going to be a modified. I mean, it's not a modified SAQ-A, but there's going to have non-applicability. Again, every little vendor's a little bit different, but typically, if you have control or you can impact the security of the page, then we are going to want to review it and assess it and make sure it's secure. If you do not have ability or, to impact the security of the page, then PCI barely applies to you, except from a contracting standpoint.
Yeah, where I draw the line is if the shopping experience is happening at the payment provider or the service provider, and they assume responsibility for all aspects of the code and administrative capability there. So you could have, come out to my website and here's a brochure of what we say and do, but you don't really have shopping ability. And maybe you just have a button to go to our shopping page, and that's the payment provider. Then that's where I would see those controls, and not necessarily on an informational web page. But like I said, that shopping experience, you can't be loading up a cart or shopping at the merchant website and then go to the checkout. I think that whole experience has to be integrity monitoring if you're going through a shopping experience.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I want to pivot just a little bit. So PCI DSS 4.0.1 is the current and has been for a long time version of the requirements. So some of that's best practice, some of that's current. When is the deadline that things move from best practice to required?
That passed at the beginning of the week.
Yeah, that train has come and gone.
I was kind of setting you guys up for that. So we're
It was
past
April
the
Fool's
deadline.
Day.
You're late.
Or what I was calling QSA retirement day. When they first came out with the requirements, I had a bunch of QSAs. We were talking one day, and I said, "This is when we're all going to retire, right? April 1." So I don't know, but the stock market's not doing well, so that'll keep us around a little longer.
So the deadline has passed. This is a little bit of my own ignorance. For a best practice requirement, is one expected to, now that the deadline's passed, I absolutely have to put those in place? Or was I supposed to have a control in place before the best practice date, no matter when my next assessment is? Do you guys see the distinction I'm teasing out there?
Technically, it should already be in place.
It should. I think every QSA company is going to do it one way. And Lee and I, we work for Trusted Second. We sort of had told our clients, look, guys, this should have already been in place. But I think a lot of stuff gets handled on an individual basis when it comes to validating PCI compliance. We've never had so many things with one deadline. There's always been one or two future things, and I think the most famous one way back in the day was 6.6 for either a WAF or vulnerability testing on your web apps, and that one had a future date, and people acted crazy about it too. But this is the first time when there's been several that all come up on the same time. So what we've been telling clients is, you guys should probably, you've known about this how long? You
should already be doing it.
That's right.
Certainly for those time-based controls, things like having to have done the TRAs, things like that. That's very easy for a QSA to say, show me a TRA from Q1, 2, 3, and 4 after your last assessment time. And it could be a sticky conversation if you didn't do anything back then. You hadn't even determined when you were going to check for whether malware on a machine that's not normally affected by malware needs to be reviewed, or how often it needs to be reviewed. But there were nine period based controls that require TRAs. So there's a wide gamut that QSA could ask to see throughout the year. So already having it done and having a process to repeat it on the frequency that you determined is something that's likely going to get checked, certainly in the first 1 to 2 assessments right after the deadline.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you said you're going to do it monthly, then show me. We can all be from Missouri. Show me. So, I mean, that's
as much as you've got the standard, you still have to be in abeyance with your own policy suites that you have implemented.
That's right.
Kind of 1.1 of every control. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So you've got both. There's only one, to the best of my knowledge, although I've got these things pretty much memorized at this point. There's only one frequency in 11.6.1 for this web page security requirements, which is once every 7 days. Between 4.0 and 4.0.1, they changed it from once weekly to once every 7 days. I kind of, as a ultra nerd, want to know what that argument was between those two people about, well, it can't be every week. It's got to be once every 7. I don't know what that was.
It's the 5 business days versus the 7 actual days.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what the clarification always is whenever I see that. It's always like it's the 24/7 clock is what they're trying to get to.
It's like trying to figure out the fiscal year.
Yeah, well, you're going to get somebody as you run across an assessment and said, well, our weeks are 256 days long. So, we just have to get to it.
This is now defined, by the way, because of these issues.
I know. It's like, don't do anything that makes me make another rule, right?
Exactly.
You're going to get some of those workers that say, hey, I only work 4 days a week.
It's like scanning. How many of you guys have had the argument? I love when the scanning on, I got to have the clean ASV scan and a clean internal scan every quarter. And this is, well, when did your quarter start? And, I've always had this argument with them. And I'm like, guys, okay, if your ROC was done on June 10, why don't you just start the next scan quarter on June 11 and, do it that way? And then, oh, no, we can't do that. We're going to use the calendar and we're going to use the ROC date. And I don't get that so much anymore. But boy, in the beginning, I went round and round with that. The use of the word quarterly. It's like, I didn't think it was a hard thing, but man, it came up so many times. Did you guys have that with clients saying, well, I don't know, is it the calendar quarter? Does it start in January?
They're always silly. I always stuck with days. Just say 90 days. Let's move on.
Were any of you guys at that PCI community meeting? I think it was like 2011. Robert, I don't think you were messing with PCI yet.
No.
It was in Arizona, I think, and there was some kid who kept getting up to the mic, and he would not stop asking that question about when the quarter started and when his scans were. And the thing that was so funny, that was back when they did the open mic. And I remember, Bob Russo and the Andy, who owns Virtual, who is the company that manages and runs the PCI Council, Andy and Bob came up to me and they're like, who is that? I'm like, I don't know. And Bob's like, get him off the mic. Well, then the kids started going to the individual sessions that had nothing to do with scanning, but they had an open mic and he'd get back in line. And
this is because those instructors kept saying, it depends.
Yeah, it was right. This was right. I'm one of them for 3 years. I did. It depends. And then my next answer was ask
it's
the
up
brands.
to your QSA. And
Right.
No,
that's the fourth. That's the fourth answer. It depends. Ask the brands. Ask the acquirer. It's up to the QSA. Those were my general.
Yeah.
But the sad thing is those answers are actually truthful. So that's the problem with this. I've said forever, if I put 10 QSAs in a room, ask a question, I'll get 10 different answers. So unfortunately, that's what happens.
Speaking of 10 different answers. So another part of this is that of the web page payment eSkimming security is that the council released pretty hefty guidance document. I think some of us were involved in putting it together. How would you guys, what advice would you, where does that fit into this new document, this new guidance document? How should people treat it? Is it like, are they changes to the requirements, or what do you do with this thing?
It's not. In fact, that document is excellent. I think I don't know if it's changes, but I think it's excellent for use there's a criteria page. And I think it's page 14. I'm going to open it quick to look at it because I believe it's page 14. And on that page, you're talking about the guidance for PCI DSS 643 for eSkimming. And I'm zipping to that page. It's either 14 or 17. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank.
I think it's 17.
Is it 17? Okay. So on 17, it is 17. And if you look on page 17, it has sort of requirements and elements, controls to help meet techniques used with the control, so on and so forth. And it does talk about both requirements 643 and 1161. And I'm kind of thinking that that's kind of a good little rule of thumb, maybe, that you could use to kind of prove that you're, to match that wording to prove it's not susceptible if we've gone through and we're doing these things.
I think it's important though to remember the guidance is just guidance. So
That's
the
right.
standard is still the standard.
That's right. This isn't a requirement. It doesn't,
So don't get too tied up into, like, honestly, I think this is a very well written guidance. Not to get myself in trouble, but there's been some poorly written guidance in the past. So like, we have to really take the guidance with a grain of salt because, this is great right now. This is super, modern, but 10 years from now, there may be some cool new technology that we're trying to apply to this that doesn't even exist when this guidance existed.
Yeah.
So that's
True.
kind of the challenge with QSAs. It's a constantly evolving bar.
Yeah, it's like if you go back and look at that one that we did a million years ago about telephone stuff, and they did upgrade it a little bit, for recordings that contain card data and some of those.
Yeah.
If you go back and look at some of those original info subs that we put out like in 2007 and 8 and stuff, it's not too helpful.
The MFA one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the MFA one. Yeah, that MFA one I think that confused more people than it ever helped.
In the guidance document, there's a topic that came up a lot in my conversations over the last 3 years, which was single page applications and how that can be handled in this case. And for anyone on the phone who's not a web developer and not anyone in the audience who's not super up on these, a single page application is where literally what it sounds like. Everything about the website happens in one single page load. That page gets updated continuously and parts of it get swapped out, but from the perspective of the web browser, it's not really a new thing that's happening overall. It's just kind of the page is changing dynamically based on what's going on. It's a very popular way to build web applications for a bunch of reasons. I'd say, I don't know, 40–50% of the stuff I see is a SPA of one kind or another.
I get it.
That's right.
But the problem
easy.
is it's risky, right? Because I think as an industry, we have to limit what goes onto the payment page because what we bring into the payment page introduces risk, right? So I'm constantly, fighting the battle of marketing. Do you really need to know every single mouse movement and click and keyboard entry that goes on every single page? I don't think that war has been won. I think we're going to constantly fight that. But single page apps, for the purposes of PCI, do not make things easier. They make it incredibly difficult, especially if you provide a lot of external references.
They do. This reminds me of the original talks, and I'm the oldest fart on here. Way back, Salesforce should be paying me a monthly stipend because back in the old days, even before PCI was a mention, sales and marketing had their CRM apps for all their customer relationship management stuff. I don't know if any of you remember operations like DoubleClick and some of those that started all this with the click ads and all the pop-up stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible because every time you would go into an organization, even before PCI was around, just as a security professional, we tell them, guys, this CRM stuff's going to kill you. And the thing is, there were no laws, no privacy laws. California SB 1386 hadn't even passed. Nobody had to report breaches. And so the problem with it was the CRM stuff it was untenable. And that's where Salesforce came from, because we just kept pushing them. You got to go to somebody to take this out of house, get it out of here. And then when Salesforce started to be a thing, all of us pushed it. And when I became a QDSP and then a QSA, go to Salesforce, get this crap out of here, get it out of here, get it out of here. And sales and marketing were furious, but now, I mean, who isn't using Salesforce? They're building big giant tower buildings in San Francisco. The thing of it is, I think we're in the same mode with these pay pages, that people put Google Analytics on there, and then that pulls in 900 other scripts, and then that goes to Joe's ice cream measurement. And it's like, I want to say to a sales guy, and any sales and marketing guys that are on here, I apologize in advance, but you guys are nuts. The stuff that you want, you can't show any value or ROI on that stuff, in my opinion. As a security professional, you scare me every day when you add this stuff to your payment pages.
And I think it's also important to remember, like, most of the people on this call are going to be cybersecurity focused.
Right.
Sales and marketing doesn't share a lot of this information with you guys. Like,
not at all.
Because the amount of data that is collected by these scripts is immense. And I would highly suggest you reach out to your marketing team to find out exactly what they're looking at, because specifically like payment pages, you have to go exclude those tools from collecting credit card data right out of the page, because I guarantee you they're collecting every single keystroke.
Absolutely. And it's always been a hard thing. I mean, how many times have we heard security needs to be involved in every project from the beginning throughout until it ends? Security's never involved in the beginning, middle, and end. And it's because they leave us out. Yeah, they leave us out on purpose, because they know, don't bring those security guys in here, we won't be able to do anything,
Well, to give marketing credit, right, I will say the payment page is also one of the most critical pages, right? I mean, Amazon's done a ton of research on this about like how fast pages is loading, how much time do people spend on the checkout, like hovering over the buy button, right? So I understand the need for this data. I believe me, I do. Just be cautious and don't introduce a ton of vendors onto those payment pages.
That's right.
And these single page apps will bring everything in. So
yeah,
it's
and
going to bring everything in. That's
the critical part. And I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff in the guidance document, but it does make it pretty clear that from the guidance anyway, is that every page that can load a payment form is in scope. And so if you have one page that is the entire application, guess what? The whole thing's in scope now. So it's, as a web developer, that pattern of the single page application is really valuable in a lot of ways. And then in this one case, it really blows out the amount of stuff you need to care about. At least it seems, in the opinion of the council and the people.
I would say, Matt, in your situation, or the caller's situation, you might be better served with a redirect. That might be a better strategy, so that you do a full redirect outside of your page.
That's true. Yeah, it's going to depend on one of the, I'm kind of off the cuff here, but one of the advantages of a SPA is that you pretty tightly unify everything user experience wise about the app. And so then when you're redirecting out of there, that might be a disconnect there. But on the other hand, it's like actually not from a business requirements of the app standpoint, but of like how to solve the problem. I think I agree with you there. To Howard's point in the chat, if you're an attacker and you're in a single page application, then you're in every single interaction that ever happens across that application. So like key logging, you just have to wire up once. And then you're going to get everything anybody ever does, which we say, of course, about the general payment page problem. If code gets in there, it can do whatever it wants. But imagine that that's the entire life cycle of a person's interaction in the case of a single page application. So it is kind of the like super spreader equivalent of eSkimming stuff rather than. Let's see. Here's an interesting question. Well, I got a couple here. Let's see. Maybe I'll leave how do you know how to trust what kind of eSkimming vendor, security vendor to work with? Actually, let's just do that. So if a merchant's going to go with a monitoring company or a vendor to solve this problem for them, the question from the audience literally says, how does a small merchant know where to begin and who to trust? which I think is valid. There's a lot of people out there who'll just take your money for not a whole lot of reason. So when you guys offer some kind of consultation about vendors, what's the general guidance you give? I guess would be a way to phrase that.
Who's going to jump on that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go first. I would say
it's a
at
tricky
Trusted
one,
Sec,
isn't it? We've
yeah,
been,
go ahead, Lee. You talk.
We've been with vendor agnostic consulting companies for years. So generally, you know, if it's product choice, we may get involved in bake-offs and make suggestions directly, but we're being paid to do that, and that's the role of the engagement. But as QSAs, we kind of have to stay away from recommendations anyway. But that's not to say that if I name Source Defense, Human, J Scrambler, Farouk in a handful, then they're typically the main players that I will be sending my clients towards checking out.
Yeah, that's I've always done it that way. It's one of the things at Trusted Sec, Lee and I, we don't sell products. We're consultants. That's all we do. We consult. So, you know, we don't want to look like we're favoring a certain product. So what I do is if I have seen, you know, say 20 different products that do a certain thing, and they all look like they can do it, then I'll give that whole list to a client and say, you know, here they are, check it out. Now, when the client comes back to me and asks me point blank, which one do you like the best and this and that, it gets sticky because I don't I don't want to say, well, this one really works, you know. It's tough. It's been a problem with QSA since the beginning. A certain company that shall remain nameless on this webinar was really bad about that. You know, they'd go in and they'd say, you know, we've assessed you now, and if you were to buy our 23 Skidoo Hooba Dooba PCI compliance pizza box and mount it in every 19-inch rack at your location, you would be compliant. And we know who the company is, and they did it for years, and there's no integrity in that. What kind of integrity does a QSA have? We're assessing. What kind of integrity do I have if I come in and I say, well, you know, you really ought to get this, then you're good. So it's always been kind of a sticky wicket, and I think everybody has to be ethical. The council makes us sign a document that says we'll remain ethical and we won't do those kind of things. So it can be tough. It can
Yeah,
be
but
tough. We have our
I
NDAs, but we have our friend DAs too.
yeah, I do think it though, being a good consultant in this space, it's really important to maintain customer relationships. You know, we always want to have the repeat business. We want our customers to come back. So it's always to be a good, trusted advisor in this space. And so what I will say as a QSA, and as I see tools and different customers implement different tools different ways, you know, and I see a customer that just doesn't know what to do in this space, you know, or has never heard of this or whatever, a lot of times I'll say, hey, out of everything that I've been assessing, you know, I will say these top three I haven't seen any challenges with. And I may say you may want to stay away from this tool, or this tool doesn't fully implement, or we've had a lot of compliance challenges with this tool or something along those lines. And I can honestly say every customer that I know that is using Source Defense is a happy customer that I've worked with. So I'm just going to say that as a nice little plug into Source Defense for hosting this. You know, are there other ones that are doing well? Yes, but I will say we don't have any complaining customers with Source Defense.
No, I agree with you, Ty. I think it's normal for QSAs. Like I said, you have the NDA and then you have the friend DA, and
Yeah.
and it's true. Like if I see one of my clients going down a road to a tool that I just know, this is a horrible thing. You're going to spend a lot of money, and you know I will have that conversation with them. I don't like those conversations, but I will.
Or just the simple gotchas. Hey, if you're going to go that route,
Right.
you know, make sure you also get
Remember
high
this.
availability systems and get a high availability solution. You know, you may want to downgrade your 999 to maybe a 997, you know, uptime, something like that. You know, just be prepared for how's your disaster recovery site doing, you know, that type of stuff, you know.
It's also
How's
an
your black
ethical,
site?
it's really an ethical requirement as a QSA, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like we're not sales. When we're
That's
when
right.
No,
we're
we don't get
employed
commission.
as QSAs, our number one focus is the customer. And yeah, I guarantee you every person on this call has their own products that they sell. But at the end of the day, as a QSA, our objective is to make our customers compliant with the standard.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I agree. I've always been on the merchant side because, I mean, it's all on them, isn't it? Really, when you think about it. So,
Well, we want the repeat business.
well,
That's why we're on the merchant
absolutely.
side.
I mean, exactly. Absolutely.
There's an interesting question, and I don't know, at the risk of being annoying, I might just answer this myself. But the idea here is the question was like, if someone, sorry, how can key logging happen in the case of an iframe or a hosted field implementation? Because an iframe is literally another web page. It's the exact same thing in a technical perspective as a new browser tab, and you can't cross-pollinate there. You can't get data from the other one. I thought that in the guidance document, they did a nice job of coining a couple phrases, or at least maybe popularizing them, if that's possible in this space, between two different things, silent skimming and double entry skimming. Because with an iframe, you're really talking about this second thing here of double entry skimming. Silent skimming is probably kind of like what in my opinion, most people would think of first with a skimming attack, like literally like putting a credit card skimmer on a gas station pump at a point of sale terminal, where the credit card numbers are getting entered into the form field and someone else is kind of hanging out and watching that happen. Now, with an iframe, that is kind of impossible. You cannot get, unless you're in the iframe, an attacker can't get those keystrokes as they're entered within there due to the nature of web browsers.
Or an overlay.
Well, that's exactly what the double entry is. Yeah. So where a visitor is duped into entering their payment information twice. So, you go through the payment process, you enter your card number, whoops, your transaction failed to enter your stuff again. That first form you would interact with is malicious and is fake and has been overlaid, exactly, Robert, on top of the normal payment process that quote unquote fails once, and then the normal payment, normal form is presented. So if you guys seen that kind of stuff out in the world, I want to make sure that person's question was answered. And I thought this particular part.
I will say this is one of the reasons that we use source. And again, I'm not trying to get every single attack right here, but if you can really restrict third-party code from running on your app, you really cut down on a lot of these type of attacks. Because if they're having to store that data on a local host and then exfiltrate that data some other method, it cuts down on the attack surface. So I think you really just need to focus on locking down your third parties ultimately.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I agree.
Coop?
Same, checking third-party scripts certainly need to be secured.
Absolutely. Big time.
I mean, the other thing is, we kind of jokingly said it about it in the early SAQ-As, but like, shared like keeping common passwords is also still a big problem, right? Like, especially on your, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like your off-the-shelf web code toolbox, whatever that you may use, don't use stupid passwords. Like those things get brute forced all the time.
Constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
GitHub.
Well, wasn't that how the match card got started?
GitHub,
Yeah.
Yeah.
GitHub. That scares me that's one of the things that scares me a lot is when developers grab snippets from here, there, everywhere, or they stuff their stuff out on GitHub and different places. And I'm just, because of my military background, to me, your source code should be protected the way we protected nukes and what we call WSAs, weapon storage areas. Source code is just flying all over the place now.
Coop, I heard the first nukes were secured by like what, 4 6s or something, or zeros, 8 zeros. That was the original password for the nukes.
The original password was a 64-bit. I can say no mercy on those guys, but you have to remember what they were using. The thing that kills me with the way they code nowadays is if a developer wants something, he just Googles for it. It goes out, oh, here it is, and he just grabs the code and starts.
AI's writing it now. They aren't even coding it anymore. The AI's writing all that code.
I know, isn't it? So, I mean, AI has all the snippets and all the pieces they need, and those are the things that kind of scare me. Is I hate walled gardens, but I'm to the point where I'm almost back to, we need the walled garden for all of this stuff.
I
So
do
we're
think,
coming to.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Matt.
No, after you, Robert.
I was going to say, I think there is still the level of risk, right? Because not all merchants are the same. We talk about smalls, but the reality is for, this group here, right? We're mostly QSAs. We're not dealing with small merchants typically. So I do think there's a difference between a small, less than 10,000 transaction organization and some 100 million transaction company that's using an SAQ-A as guidance for their rock, right? So I do think there's a difference in risk that we also need to consider.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Those bigger merchants, they need to. I was telling you folks yesterday when we were talking about this webinar that one of my clients is huge, and we built out a DMZ back when, they could have just said, hey, the FAQ came out, we're going to use SAQ-A to scope, we're good. And I said, no. I said, as your QSA, I won't sign off on it. And they were like, but you have to. And I was like, I don't have to. And so we had a lot of discussions. They were very angry at me. And but in the end, they were very pleased. We built out a DMZ, and every control that we could apply to that server that served up that iframe, we applied it. And knock on wood, they never got breached. That particular portion never got breached. And when they had a corporate breach, it didn't touch the payment stuff. And had they just gone along and did what they were going to do, it would have been grabbed because it would have been sitting over there.
So to Robert's point earlier, that there is super small merchant companies, level 4 and level 3. I think the rule of thumb is if you have to get a QSA involved in your assessment, right, to sign off on it, you probably should have a mature tool that does integrity monitoring on your websites. Because one, there are some gray QSAs, but I will say most QSAs are black and white. They're reading those standards and it's like, do you have that? Yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. And it's really hard to find a QSA that will vouch for you and go into the gray area and look deep into how you're handling 643 and 1161, or if that they're going to do a rock and not include 643 and 1161, even if you qualify for the SAQ-A, just because they're used to it. They're used to writing rocks more than they are SAQs.
Mm-hmm.
That just a rule of thumb.
So it
goes that way.
And you don't want to be at hey, I got to turn something in to my bank, next month or 2 months from now, and you haven't implemented anything all year.
So that's actually exactly what my next question was going to be, because we're barreling towards the end of our time together. So I kind of want to play out the worst case scenario. So maybe let's pretend I'm a merchant. I was kind of banking on some kind of change to the SAQ-A or some other part of the requirements that was going to make this easier on me. Based on today's conversation, it sounds like you guys are in consensus that they still have to do something. It's pretty much more or less the same as it was before. And in your professional opinion, you're going to rely on 643 and 1161 to do that. So I kind of placed my bets in the wrong place. I thought it was going to get easier, and it's about the same. And now we're past the deadline. What advice would you give to me as that merchant in that spot where I kind of need to do something now and I have negative time to do it? What advice would you give that person?
You have to show me some kind of, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, you got to show me some kind of report or some kind of proof or documented control that your website is not susceptible to a scripting attack. So that means show me that you're monitoring it somehow.
That's right.
Or give me a pen test report or something.
Yeah,
show me that somebody could not breach your website and put a script up there or a redirection link on your parent page.
I think it's important to realize sometimes this is not Source Defense, and companies like Source Defense have done a really good job of making this relatively easy, but this is not trivial, right?
No.
This idea of, hey, first off, I got to go look at all these third parties that you might have running, but the question's going to come up, do you block? And when do you block? And I've ran into issues, right? I look at something, I'm like, hey, we don't need that. And then who knew one random app, right, uses this random function and it needed it. So please don't wait, because I have clients working at least the last year on this stuff, right? Going through all of their, payment pages, all their scripts. I mean, it's easy to say, hey, this does this, this does this. But when you start saying, hey, I'm going to block this, or, notifying your developers that let's say you're running a developers security is a different group, right? So you might have developers might push a change out that introduces a new third party that you don't tell, your source defense about. That's going to get blocked automatically, right? These type of conversations need to happen, and they need to happen earlier and earlier. So I would please just start now.
Yeah, because if you don't, you're really in deep trouble. I mean, all of these solutions, human, source defense, J Scrambler for root, all the ones I've seen and more, and even what Akamai and F5 are doing, what always amazes me is when they first show a merchant their site, what they have, no matter what tool they use, the merchant was like, what? What is this? And I, as a QSA, I don't know about you guys, I didn't like those answers. What is this? This is your site. And they have no freaking idea what those scripts are, what they're doing. That's the scary part of this. And
some are more noisy than others.
Right. And that's why, all these companies like Source Defense and Human and J Scrambler for root and the rest of them, they've made it easy for them. So it's like, guys, you should be using these tools because you don't even know what you have out there.
Well, I'll give you a real world.
Pick the tool though, but I would say pick the tool though that helps you, that recognizes what a lot of these common scripts are from Google and analytics and stuff.
That's right.
And that tool says, hey, we've seen this so much with all our customers. We can tell you what this is instead of you going out and figuring it out what it is, because let them use their intelligence that's baked into their tool to say, hey, I know what this is. You don't have to worry about it.
That's right. The analytics that they have are outstanding, because that's what these tool organizations or manufacturers, suppliers, whatever you want to call them, have done. But you're right, that's what you need, because if you're one of those merchants that looks at it and goes, oh my God, what is this?
And then they give a severity rating of it, like this looks harmful, you don't want to just have, okay, here's a list and get the nice little Excel spreadsheet spit out that says, okay, go figure out what your scripts are. You want something that's going to go give a severity rating on it, say, hey, this could be threatening, or, oh, your privacy data is leaving, you might want to do something about that, or, oh, this is pretty safe, this is normal communication chatter. That's what you want out of your tool that's doing this for you. And you need to show that level of maturity to a QSA. That's what we're really making this call all about, is if you're doing high volume transaction, like a level 2 or level 1 merchant, you should have a tool integrated that has that intelligence built in. And the manual approach, I just don't see people being successful with it.
I don't either. I really don't. I just don't see it working. I even the clients I have that are very mature with IT, very mature with their compliance, and very mature with their processes, it's going to be a challenge for them. And it just is.
And just a word of warning, these companies like Source Defense, they also have the scanning tools that us QSAs can use to scan your site. So if you're doing a manual thing, we could, potentially walk your site with their tool and say, hey, what about this script? I didn't see that in your Excel spreadsheet.
That's something I hadn't really considered. Anyway, I don't really like looking over people's shoulders too often, but I'm happy to help wherever I can as best I can. We're at our time here today. I want to thank our panel for joining us. You guys are an invaluable source of expertise, so we really greatly appreciate it. Thanks to our audience for coming and for asking all those great questions. We hope we were helpful. If you have any questions about us, feel free to follow up. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by more questions. I'm sorry, we're out of time. But we want to thank everybody. Thanks so much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.